You are listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is Season 1, Episode 9, Liz Story. I'm your host, Haley Radke. Today we'll be talking to Liz Story, a fellow adoptee who will be sharing her adoptee journey with us. We discuss Liz's reunion with her birth mother, her hesitation to connect with her birth father, and how Twitter led Liz to explore an entirely new definition of what it means to be adopted. We'll wrap up with some recommended resources for you. I'm so pleased to welcome to the show today Liz Story, and she is an adoptee, and she's agreed to share some of her story with us today. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much, Haley. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It's so cool to connect with you. So I'd love it if you would start and just share a bit about your adoption story.
Well, I have a little bit of the typical story of relinquishment. I was 6 weeks old when I was adopted, but it was a planned adoption. So from the time, so let me go back to my birth mother. So she became pregnant, obviously. She never told the birth father that she was pregnant. So he was her first love, her first boyfriend, first everything. And he broke up with her, broke her heart, and she decided not to tell him that she was pregnant. She wanted to let him just go on about his life, which he did. And then she went through some severe denial that she was pregnant. Like, she actually went on dates with guys, like just refused to acknowledge the fact, even though she knew, she just kind of didn't acknowledge it until one day her mother saw the massively growing baby bump and said, okay, you're pregnant. Took her to the doctor. From what I'm told, the doctor came in and with adoption pamphlets for my grandmother and said, here you go. And so it wasn't even a discussion. My grandmother took the paperwork and was like, oh, okay, so this is what we're doing. And so my mother went into a Florence Crittenton home, much like many others that did that, until she gave birth. And then I went into, a hospital. I stayed in a hospital for 6 weeks until my adoptive parents picked me up. I was born in Mobile, Alabama, in 1974. And they adopted me, and we moved to Mississippi just for a few years, and then moved to Arkansas, which is where I was raised. So that's a bit of the backstory. I had a really amazing childhood. So parents that adored me. My mother was abused as a child. So it was kind of her life mission to have children that she could love and nurture and, give unconditional love to, which she did very well, but she had a lot of unresolved issues from being abused. And I think just the kind of person that I actually was fiercely independent, still am. And all the reflection that I've done on myself and my situation, I really feel like that fierce independence came from being born into nobody's arms. You're born and thrown into a crib with people you don't know, voices you don't recognize, and you're fighting for attention, you're fighting for food, you're just fighting with all these other babies in a room. And I think that's really where, in reflection, I think I really became independent from that. I don't know that for sure, but I feel that way. So her and I did not get along after I got a little older, say 12, 13, much typical teenager behavior caused that as well. But on top of that, I knew I was adopted and, all of the feelings of I'm so different. Like I will never get along with her. I'm so different from her. And so she and I really struggled. And I always wanted to find my birth mother. I did have unidentifying or non-identifying information as well. I broke into my parents' safe when I was a youngster and found that information. That was not offered to me. My mother never wanted to talk about the fact that I was adopted, and she would always say, I don't want you to think you're adopted. You're my child, which is noble. But I think ignoring it and pushing it to the side doesn't help anybody, especially doesn't help adoptees. I think we can all agree on that. Mm-hmm. So I would check into this non-identifying information in the safe. I would look at that constantly. Anytime I could sneak away to that room and look at it, I would look at it. I would just study it. And I just became obsessed with wanting to know what she looked like. Above anything else, I just wanted to know what she looked like. And I hear so many other adoptees saying the same thing. They just want to know where you get your features and things like that. And my birth mother sounded, and the non-identifying information sounded just like me. So I was like fascinated. And I listened to, I think it was Holly or Carrie, talk about, this fantasy you come up with, who your parents are. And I did the same thing. I thought my birth mother was Queen Elizabeth and I was a princess. I think it was Holly that said that. I was like, me too. So I became obsessed with finding her just to see what she looked like, because I did have a loving home. Even though my mom and I did not get along all the time, I still felt loved and I was taken care of, and I had a wonderful family and I had so much fun. I just didn't feel like I belonged in the country. I didn't feel like I belonged with these people, even though I love them. And to this day, they're my family. It's my mom and dad. I'll never refer to them as anything else. That's my mom and dad and my brother. My brother's also adopted. So my mom had 6 or 7 miscarriages. So that's why they went to adoption. It's a really heart-wrenching story was what she went through with miscarriages. So they adopted my brother first. So he's not a blood brother to me, but we were obviously raised together. He has no interest. Being adopted means nothing to him. Like, he's the complete opposite of me in that. So I always thought that was interesting too. Like, he doesn't care, or he doesn't seem to care. I question also whether or not when my parents pass, if then he will become a little more interested. Because when I did come into reunion with my birth mother, he got a little more interested.
I'd love to hear about how you searched and found her.
So interesting. I graduated high school in 1993 and decided to drive to the adoption agency in Mississippi with my best friend. We did a road trip. Didn't tell anybody. It's like the day after graduation. I was 18. We got in her car and drove from Arkansas to Mississippi, found the adoption agency, and went in there, talked to a social worker, and she went and got some file, and it was my file. And she sat right across the desk from me, and she had my file, and she's like, oh, yeah. Oh, I see your birth certificate here and all your stuff. I was like, oh, great. You're like, give it over. She's like, I can't give it to you. So it was closed records from a closed adoption. She told me I had to be 21 years old and have had like 36 hours of post-adoption counseling before I could even apply to get that paperwork. I've never heard that before. Even to this day, I've never heard anybody say that. So I left just completely dejected because I didn't know what closed records were. I didn't know, I just figured it's my information. Like, it's me, let me have it. So I left very dejected and just, sad. But I just shoved the feelings away, and I was like, well, I guess, I'll go on to college and go on with my life, whatever. So it wasn't until I had my daughter that I piqued my interest again. And this is when internet really started going too. So I was doing searches on registries, and I put my information all over registries all over the place. And I found a website. So I was born in Alabama. There were people trying to get lobby for the records to be opened in Alabama. So I wrote my letters to the congresspeople of Alabama. And knowing what I know now, I can't believe that the records were actually opened not long after I wrote my letters. But I didn't know what a huge effort that is for the people actually driving that legislation. But anyway, they opened the records, so I sent in my $20 in an application, and I got my original birth certificate. So there I had it, my original birth certificate and my court paperwork. So my birth mother's name was on the birth certificate, and it said one thing. And then my court paperwork, where my parents went to court to be my parents and have it legalized, there was a different last name for my birth mother on the court paperwork. So I was like, okay. Now I have no idea, is it Sally Roberts or is it Sally Rogers? I don't know. So I put it away. Internet was just coming out. There was no Facebook or anything like that. I did some Google searches, but nothing came up for her. And so I just put it away again. And then I moved to Florida And I had bought a condo and then was selling the condo, and I had some extra money out of that sale. And I was like, that's it. I'm searching. Like, I'm paying somebody to go find her. And so I hired an online private investigator. It was Worldwide Tracers. And within 4 weeks, they found her. And so I told the investigator, I just want to know who she is and what she looks like. Like, please do not contact her. I just want to know who she is and what she looks like. But they contacted her anyway. So I get a phone call from them, and they had sent her a letter. And we found her. I'm like, oh, it's amazing. Like, but she wants a few days to think about this. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, you shouldn't have contacted her. It's not what I asked you to do, but you did. And that's okay. So, okay. She wants a few days. So apparently she and her husband are very wealthy. And so they wanted a few days to contact a lawyer to make sure I wasn't after their money or, I don't know, but I don't know. Her husband didn't know that she had given a child up for adoption. So she got the letter. She said she felt like a huge weight was lifted off her shoulder. She was relieved, but she had to tell her husband of 20 something years, oh, by the way, I have a child. So she told him, he's the one I think that really wanted the lawyer to check things out. So it was a few days later, the investigator called me back, and they're like, she's good. She wants to meet you. Here's her contact information. Here's her phone number and address. Call her. So it took me 3 days to gather up the courage to actually call her. I was scared to death because it was opening up a can of worms, and I didn't know if it was a good can of worms or a bad can of worms. And so, and you can't go back. It was a point of no return. Once I made that phone call, it was a point of no return to God knows what was going to happen. So I was terrified. But at the same time, it's like my whole life, I'm 30 years old at this point when I find her. My whole life I'm wondering, and here it is. And all I have to do is call, So 3 days later, I give her a call. She doesn't answer the phone, and I leave a message, and she calls me back. And it was just to hear her voice was like immediately, I'm like, okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. This feels good. She answered some basic questions. I really didn't know what all to ask, actually, just kind of on the phone. I don't know. I was a little shocked, I guess, shell-shocked. So she wanted me to send her some pictures, and she was going to send me some pictures. And she wanted to meet me. So they were going to they were still in Alabama, same place. So they set up a meeting. They came down to Florida. And so me and my 5-year-old daughter, went to this condo that they had rented. And when she and I met, it was like two old friends coming together again. It's like seeing somebody you hadn't seen in 20 years. It was that kind of feeling. It wasn't like cry, boo-hoo, oh my God. It was just like comfort. Like, okay, this is awesome. We have the same eyes. We learned we had some of the same hobbies. We had the same favorite author. So that was just so much fun getting to know her, and then about, the family and who all was in my family. I have 3 aunts and an uncle on her side. So she told me one of my aunts, because I wanted to know about health issues. So one of my aunts, she said, contracted the hereditary disease that killed my grandfather, which is a polycystic kidney disease, and she would eventually need a kidney. And in my mind, I didn't say this out loud. In my mind, I was like, that's going to be me. I'll give her my kidney. I didn't say anything. We kept talking, and I have a half brother that on her side. She didn't tell me about the father. She told me about what happened with the father, but she wouldn't tell me who he was. I could tell that it was still a very huge source of pain for her. To this day, it's still a huge source of pain for her to think about him. So I didn't press it. And I think it's really interesting as a side note that adoptees never want to press their birth mothers. It's like a minefield, and you don't want to set off that mine. Like, we're so protective of their feelings. So interesting. But anyway, so we had a really good first meeting, and that was in 2005. So 11 years ago we met. and we have an ongoing relationship. There was a honeymoon, of course, but we never had a timeout. We have never had a timeout. It's just, it hasn't been all rainbows, but it has been work. But she and I talk on very deep levels, and she needs that. She has a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of stuff that's still very hard for her to, I don't think she'll ever let it go. And I find myself trying to reassure her, comfort her, but she also does that for me. So I think a lot of people don't get that. And so I'm really fortunate that she really tries to make me feel loved. She feels very guilty, but at the same time, she's so proud of who I am and who I became as I am. And we would never have this amazing relationship had she not given me up for adoption. And I know her even better now. And I know she was not ready. I know it would have been a really hard, difficult life. I'm sure we would have made it through just fine. And I'm sure we would have loved each other just as much and all of that. So I'm also on that side of the fence. Like, no matter how hard it would have been, we would have had each other. But I am still grateful. I mean, it is what it is. I was relinquished. I grew up with an adoptive family, and it was a positive thing. So as long as I don't forget the hurt and trauma, for me, it's okay to enjoy the positives as well. So she and I have really had a really great relationship. I did end up donating my kidney to her sister in 2010. So 5 years after I met her. And it's really interesting because out of the whole family, I was the only one that was, of the ones willing to get tested, I was the only good match out of the whole family. So everything happens for a reason. Yeah. I was brought back into their lives for a reason, and they were brought to me for a reason. That the kidney donation thing went fine. My aunt's, amazing. She runs 5Ks now. Like, she's tries to honor me through that. I wrote a book in 3 years ago, 2013. I wrote a book about, the journey. And at that point, when I finished writing the book, I sent it to her and my mom for them to read it first, to get, an okay, thoughts, what do you want me to hold back, whatever. When she got that manuscript, she called me and she said, I think it's time I tell you who your father is. So 8 years after I met her, and I never once asked her, 8 years later, she finally tells me who he is. So that was a happy day for me, just to know who he is. But through some Facebook stalking, know about him and his family, and he's on his third wife, and she's like 4 years older than me, and his third marriage. I don't think it's the right time at all for me to try to reach out to him. She actually ended up telling him. After she told me, she said, let me be the one to tell him about you, because he never knew, right? So she called him and told him about me, and his only question was, are you sure it was mine? Which made her so angry. But anyway, yes, it's yours. It was yours. She's yours. And he just didn't say another word. She went through the whole story, and he never said one word. And she's like, oh, okay, well, if you want to know her, want to reach out, I've got her information. Just let me know. Take a few days to think about it. And she never heard back from him, which I get. He never knew, there's no bond there. I always say this, if you didn't know me, you wouldn't know that you wanted to know me. So it doesn't bother me, but it bothers me because I'll always have a piece in the back of my mind that's like, what would he say? What would he do? Would he be proud? Why do I care? I don't know. I just care. Like, it's there. But I'm not going to, the time has not come yet for me to reach out to him. Maybe someday, maybe not. But at least I know who he is, and I can always stalk him and see what's going on. But yeah, so it's been great.
Do you have any advice for people about reunion?
Taking it slow is good. And I agree with timeouts on either side, because that just means there's issues that person's trying to resolve, and they don't want to be hurting that person while they're doing that. I think it's smart to go slowly. Timeouts are okay. Like, you had a however many year timeout when you were being raised by someone else, and to be compassionate to the birth family, but also to expect compassion back. Don't let them take advantage of our need to comfort them. I don't know why we feel that need, but we do, and we try to do it. But, I would say just go slow and respect yourself and respect them, and use the resources online.
So is there anything that you've done to build up your relationship to such a deep level?
We don't talk every day. We don't talk every week. Maybe once a month we'll catch up or whatever. I feel like we don't force anything. Nothing's forced on either side. And I think by always kind of pushing her to open up, and she's the kind of person that accepts that. So I don't know if that would work for everybody, but she's the kind of person I can kind of get her to open up by just saying something that opens the door. And then she just kind of starts talking, and I try to keep the dialogue going, having those deep conversations, and not only having compassion for her, what she went through, with giving up a child, because, oh my God, I can't imagine. I did actually consider giving my child up for adoption because I had such a good experience. I'm like, oh no, I can't do that. Personally can't do that. But, being compassionate to her about that, but then in other aspects of her life where she feels a hole, whether it's from somebody in the family that's not giving her, whatever it is outside of our relationship, I try to also be compassionate to her in those areas so that she can trust me, so that she feels like she can trust me, and that I'm an ear for her that's not judging her. And being that for her has let her be what I need her to be for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like that in most relationships, right? The give and take, and
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so you said that you have a half brother?
Yes, I do have a half brother. He's 6 years younger than me, and I on my birth father's side, there's 2 half sisters, but I'll likely never meet them, and that's okay. The half brother and I also have like a step brother and a step sister from my birth mother's current husband. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage that he brought in, and then they had my brother together. They were all very leery of me at first, especially my stepfather's daughter was very, because my stepfather, birth mother's husband, just adores me. Like, I think he's just fascinated by the whole story and everything, and he's always just adored me. I think they felt a little jealous at first because obviously I was getting a lot of attention, coming into the family. Everybody wanted to know me. Everybody wanted to get to know me and hang out with me. And, I think the 3 of them felt a little jealous, which is so natural. And I tried very hard to respect their feelings as well. But after, I don't know, the first 6 months, year, everybody chilled out and realized I wasn't there to take the family fortune, and I wasn't there to take their love away from them, and that I'm really just value added to the family. Once they all saw that, everything's fine. Then we're all very, very tight-knit, which is great. I always told my daughter, the more people you have in your heart, the bigger, more full it is. You could never have too many people that you love. And so to have 2 families, they're separate, they're very different from each other. It's just more value in my life to have these two sets of families. And my birth mother and my adoptive mother have actually met, which was awesome. My adoptive mom is very jealous, insecure person, so she was very concerned. She did not appreciate the fact that I was donating my kidney to my birth aunt. In fact, my mom was so upset by it. My mom tends to say things before she thinks, and she was saying when I was going to donate my kidney, she's like, they threw you away like trash and you're giving them your kidney. It's like, stop and think about what you're saying. It's not. And it was all out of fear. She was just scared. But once she met my birth mother, and my birth mother thanked her immensely and showed my mom so much respect for, taking me and loving me and growing me up into this beautiful woman, my adoptive mom's like, oh yeah, I love her. It's just like, and they were like best friends. So it's just interesting. As the adoptee, unfortunately, it's a fact. We have to manage everyone else's feelings around us and our own. It's just a fact. We have to.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to do that, I think.
Absolutely. And I have a lot of ideas and theories on that too that I write about in my blog. But it's fascinating to me.
That's so cool that they met. And do they keep in touch at all, or have they?
Occasionally.
Okay.
Yeah, occasionally they do. My birth mother's very active. They travel all over the world, and she'll buy my mom something from one of her travels and send it to her. And my mom just thinks that's the most amazing thing, right? And she just adores Sally, my birth mother. So when I talk to my mom, she'll be like, well, have you talked to Sally? How's she doing? But they keep in touch every once in a while. But they have a tremendous amount of respect for each other.
If she's so similar to you, how could your adoptive mom not help but love your birth mom?
That's a great point.
Have you done any counseling, therapy, anything like that through this period of time for reunion or just adoptee issues?
Not formal therapy, but the most therapeutic thing I've done was write a book. It's like that, it opens up old wounds. It makes you really analyze behaviors. And because in a book, you want to tell people why something is. And I just found myself asking these questions, and I call it root cause analysis. So you ask why, and you come up with an answer. And then you say why again until you run out of, whys, and you finally get to that root cause. My book made me do that a lot, and writing in my blog. Those two things are the most therapeutic things I've ever, and reading other people's blogs and being on Twitter is just mind blown what I've learned on Twitter, because I wrote my book, and up until probably 2 years ago, never thought anything negative about adoption. I was one of those. And then when I joined Twitter and I saw Claudia Darcy on Twitter, and Priscilla, I don't know her last name, who started correcting me on my terminology. I'm like, what's happening? Like, what are these? How are they feeling this way? Like, what is this? What is this? And I started digging deeper and deeper and reading blogs and talking to these people on Twitter. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did feel that way. Oh yeah, I still do feel that way, but you're not encouraged to talk about those things. So you think they don't exist. And so going on Twitter and meeting those people changed my life and changed the way that I relate to other adoptees completely. So it's interesting in my blog, if you start from day one and read up through now, you will actually see the transformation and me going through those 5 stages, where it's like happy to, oh, I did have trauma. Oh, I do feel the pain now. And then coming out on the other side, you see it in my writing. It's amazing. I'm ashamed of some of the things that I wrote about, knowing what I know now and how other adoptees feel. I'll go back to some of my early writings and I'm like, oh, I was so blind. But I want to keep those blog posts in there because it's good to see that transformation. And I thank you and all of the others on Twitter and through social media that I've met that helped me get to this point, because it's been an amazing ride.
I think it's so wonderful, though, that you've been able to keep both the perspectives, though, right? The reality of there is pain in adoption and it's not all happy. And yet you've spoken so highly of your adoptive parents and your upbringing, and I think you've come to a really balanced place.
That's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really wonderful. I mean, there's adoptees on both sides, right? It's just like
yes.
Everything is awful. And I mean, and for them, maybe it really is, but what a horrible place to live your life in that.
Yes, exactly. There's, like you said, the very good, the very bad, and there's all this in between. And as you said, how do you find the balance between what you went through and the pain you may not physically remember, but subconsciously remember, and through all the good stuff, and how you just mush it all together and try to live a happy, positive life, going forward. Take the lessons you've learned and apply them to your life and help others apply them to their lives.
So is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to talk about?
No, I think I've definitely said most of it. What I haven't said is on my blog. So I would love for anybody listening to go read my blog. Don't just read it, but talk to me about it. I want other people's opinions. I want your perspective. I want you to tell me if you think I'm wrong or whatever. Again, keep in mind that my first part of my blog is, I call it blind. So look at my journey. There's a lot. There's so many. There's another person you talked to that was like, I'm still finding triggers, and I'm still finding triggers. I'm still finding aspects that I never thought of before. Yeah, go check my blog out. It's at adopteesearchingforself.com. Please let me know what y'all think.
And what's your Twitter handle?
Liz Story 0611.
Great. Well, we can connect with you there. So that's your recommended resource, is checking out the blog. And
among the others.
Among the others, yeah. So mine is actually a podcast episode. Do you listen to Radiolab at all?
No, I never heard of it.
So Radiolab is a podcast that is almost always at the top of the charts. It's very popular. And they've released sort of a mini series spin-off, and it's called More Perfect. And every show I've listened to so far is about some Supreme Court case or something to do with the Supreme Court. So I find it super fascinating.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm in Canada, so we do have a Supreme Court, but our system, I think, is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. One particular episode is called Adoptive Couple v. Baby Girl. And it is actually a replay of another Radiolab episode, but they've updated it. And it's about the baby Veronica case. And so, speaking of triggers, this was a big trigger for me, but I did feel like it was important to listen to. And so I don't know if it's quite an hour, maybe not quite. Most of their focus is about the Indian Child Welfare Act, and that's why the case was so important to Radiolab to cover. But as an adoptee listening to it and hearing the reporter covering it, first it really sounded like he totally understood the adoptive parents' side of it. And then coming around to the end of the story, I think he finally got the full picture.
Nice.
And so for me personally, when I'm hearing this story, and if our listeners haven't heard before about baby Veronica, so there's her adoptive parents are the Capiobancos, and then her birth father is Dustin Brown, and her birth mother is Christy Maldonado. And so their brief summary, I guess, is that Christy gave Veronica up for adoption, and Dustin signed some paperwork, but then later claimed that he didn't necessarily know exactly what he was signing. So once he found out that Veronica was actually adopted out to another couple, then he realized, oh, that must have been what I signed. Mm-hmm. And so it just talks about his fight to get his daughter back, and he did regain custody. And then this case went to the Supreme Court. The adoptive couple, the Capiobancos, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that the adoptive couple got to keep Veronica. So
sick.
So by the end of the story, I was bawling, and I was not. So there's the trigger warning for,
yes.
But it was really important and valuable to listen to. And you talked before about some of the advocacy that you've done and writing to the lawmakers to get birth records opened. And it's good for us not to put our heads in the sand and know what's happening.
As different and diverse as our stories are, we have to stand together on that issue of the legal issues. We have to stand together.
Yeah. So I'm sad to call that a recommended resource, but it was really eye-opening for me. And I hadn't realized that the case had gone all the way there.
Yeah, no, that's a very good resource.
Well, it was such a pleasure talking with you today, Liz. Thank you.
You too. Thank you, Haley. This was fun.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. And I hope that our listeners will come and check out your blog and connect with you and continue the conversation there. That would be really, really great.
I would love it. Thank you so much for the platform in which to do this. Thank you.
If you have more questions for Liz or would just like to thank her for sharing with us, you can connect with her on Twitter at Liz Story 0611. Her blog, adopteesearchingforself.com, has information about how to get her book, A Series of Extreme Decisions, An Adoptee's Story. The show notes with links to everything we've discussed today are available on our website, adopteeson.com. You can also connect with us on Twitter or Instagram at adopteeson or facebook.com/adopteesonpodcast. If you're finding these stories valuable, would you let a friend know today? Recommend us to a fellow adoptee, perhaps someone you know that needs to have that me too moment. Sharing the show with your adoptee community is absolutely the best way you can support us. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again soon.